The radio in Officer Sarah Martinez's patrol car crackled to life at exactly 2:30 in the morning. She had been driving slowly through the quiet downtown streets, checking for any trouble during her night shift. The city looked peaceful at this hour, with empty sidewalks and streetlights casting long shadows between the tall buildings. Unit 47, we have a suspicious person report. The dispatcher's voice came through clearly. Sarah picked up her radio and pressed the button to respond. Unit 47 here. Go ahead, she said, already turning her car toward the downtown area. We have multiple calls about a suspicious male near the ATM machines on 5th Street. Witnesses say he's been there for about 20 minutes, acting strange around the machines. Caller says he might be trying to break into them or steal from them. Sarah felt her heart beat a little faster. ATM crimes were becoming more common in the city. Just last month, another officer had caught someone trying to steal cash from a machine using a crowbar. These crimes usually happened late at night when fewer people were around to see what was happening. Copy that, I'm about 5 minutes away, Sarah said into the radio. She turned on her emergency lights but kept the siren off. Sometimes it was better to arrive quietly so the suspect would not run away before she could see what was happening. Sarah had been a police officer for 5 years now. She started working for the Metro Police Department right after finishing college. In those 5 years, she had seen many different types of crimes and criminals. Some were dangerous, some were just desperate, and some were simply making bad choices. But she had learned to always be careful and never assume anything about a situation until she could see it with her own eyes. As she drove toward 5th Street, Sarah thought about what she might find there. The ATM machines in that area were popular targets for criminals because they were located between two busy shopping areas. But late at night, very few people walked by. This made it easier for someone to work on the machines without being seen by many witnesses. Sarah had arrested people for ATM crimes before. Some tried to break the machines open with tools. Others used fake card readers to steal people's bank information. These crimes were serious because they could steal thousands of dollars from innocent people who just wanted to get cash from their bank accounts. The radio crackled again. Unit 47, we just got another call about the same location. This caller says the suspect has some kind of tools and appears to be working on the card reader part of the machine. Understood, Sarah replied. This new information made the situation sound more serious. If the person really had tools and was working on the card reader, he might be installing a skimming device. These devices could steal information from hundreds of bank cards before anyone discovered them. Sarah had taken special training about these skimming devices just 6 months ago. The training taught her that criminals could make these devices look almost exactly like the real card readers on ATM machines. People would put their cards into what they thought was the normal machine, but the device would copy all their information. Later, the criminals would return to collect the device and use the stolen information to make fake cards and steal money. As she got closer to 5th Street, Sarah turned off her emergency lights. She wanted to observe the situation first before the suspect knew police were there. She had learned this technique during her training at the police academy. Sometimes you could learn much more about what someone was really doing if you watched them for a few minutes before making contact. Sarah turned onto 5th Street and drove slowly. She could see the row of ATM machines about 2 blocks ahead. There were 4 machines lined up outside a small shopping center. During the day, these machines were very busy with people getting cash, but now they looked empty and quiet. Then she saw him. A tall man wearing dark clothes was standing next to one of the middle machines. Even from a distance, Sarah could see that he was doing something with his hands near the front of the machine. He kept looking around, which made his behavior seem even more suspicious. Sarah parked her patrol car about half a block away, behind a large truck that was parked on the street. This position gave her a good view of the suspect, while keeping her car hidden from his sight. She turned off her engine and picked up her small binoculars from the dashboard. Through the binoculars, Sarah could see the man much more clearly. He was wearing a black hoodie with the hood pulled up over his head. His hands were busy working on something at the front of the ATM machine, right where people would normally put their bank cards. It looked exactly like what she had been taught about criminals installing skimming devices. The man had something in his hands that looked like a small electronic device. He was being very careful with it, working slowly and checking around him every few seconds. Sarah watched as he moved from one machine to another one about 10 feet away. At the second machine, he began doing the same type of work. Sarah reached for her radio to call for backup, but then decided to wait a few more minutes. She wanted to see exactly what the man was doing and gather as much information as possible. The more details she could provide, the stronger the case would be when she arrested him. After watching for another 5 minutes, Sarah was convinced that she was looking at a criminal in action. The man's behavior, the tools in his hands, and the way he kept checking for witnesses all pointed to illegal activity. She had seen enough. Sarah started her car engine and began driving slowly toward the ATM machines. Her training had taught her to approach carefully in situations like this. The suspect might run when he saw her police car, or he might even be dangerous. She needed to be ready for anything. As she got closer, Sarah could see that the man was still working on the second machine. He was so focused on what he was doing that he had not yet noticed her patrol car approaching. This gave Sarah an advantage because she could get closer before he realized police were there. Sarah stopped her car about 50 feet away from the ATM machines and turned on her spotlight. The bright light immediately lit up the area where the man was working. This was the moment that would change everything for both of them. The bright spotlight from Sarah's patrol car lit up the entire area around the ATM machines like daylight. The man in the black hoodie immediately stopped what he was doing and turned toward the light. Sarah could see his face clearly now for the first time. He looked to be in his 30s with dark hair and a surprised expression. For a moment, neither of them moved. The man stood frozen next to the ATM machine, still holding something small in his hands. Sarah sat in her car, watching him carefully and deciding what to do next. She had been trained to observe suspects before taking action, especially when she was alone and backup had not arrived yet. The man did not run away, which surprised Sarah a little. Most criminals would try to escape as soon as they saw police lights. Instead, this man just stood there looking at her car. Sarah could see that he was thinking about something, maybe deciding whether to run or stay where he was. Sarah picked up her radio again. "Dispatch, this is Unit 47. I have visual contact with the suspect at the 5th Street ATM location. Male, approximately 30 to 35 years old, wearing a black hoodie. He appears to have some kind of device in his hands and was working on the ATM machines when I arrived." "Copy that, Unit 47. Do you need backup?" the dispatcher asked. Sarah looked at the man again. He was still standing in the same place, and he did not look like he was preparing to run. He also did not appear to have any weapons that she could see. But Sarah knew that situations could change quickly, and it was always better to be safe. "Yes, please send backup to my location," Sarah said. "The suspect is not moving right now, but I want to be careful." "Backup is on the way. Unit 47 ETA about 8 minutes. 8 minutes felt like a long time when you were watching a suspected criminal. But Sarah decided to use this time to gather more information. She continued watching the man through her binoculars, noting everything she could see about his appearance and behavior. The man was tall, probably about 6 feet. His black hoodie looked new and expensive, not like the old clothes that many street criminals wore. His jeans also looked clean and in good condition. This made Sarah think that maybe he was not a typical drug addict or homeless person who might commit crimes for money. In his left hand, the man was holding what looked like a small electronic device about the size of a cell phone. It had some kind of wire or cable attached to it. In his right hand, he had what appeared to be a small tool, maybe a screwdriver or something similar. These definitely looked like the tools that criminals use to install skimming devices on ATM machines. Sarah noticed that the man kept looking at her patrol car, but he also kept looking around the area as if he was watching for other people. This behavior made her even more suspicious. Why would an innocent person be so worried about who might be watching him? After a few more minutes, the man started to move slowly. He took a step toward Sarah's car and then stopped. He appeared to be trying to decide whether to approach her or stay where he was. Sarah kept her hand near her radio, ready to call for immediate help if the man made any sudden movements. Then the man did something that really surprised Sarah. He raised both hands above his head, still holding the device and tool, and started walking slowly toward her car. This was not normal behavior for a criminal who had just been caught in the act. Most suspects would either run away or try to hide the evidence of their crime. Sarah rolled down her window but stayed inside her car. "Stop right there and put those items on the ground," she called out loudly. The man stopped walking but did not put the items down. "Officer, I think there has been a misunderstanding," he called back to her. His voice was calm and clear, not nervous like most criminals sounded when they were caught. Put the items on the ground now, Sarah repeated, using the firm voice she had been taught in police training. She did not want to listen to excuses or explanations until the suspect was secured and any weapons or tools were away from him. The man hesitated for a moment, then slowly placed the electronic device and the tool on the ground next to his feet. He raised his hands again and stood very still. Sarah got out of her car but stayed behind the open driver's door, which would give her some protection if the situation became dangerous. She kept one hand on her service weapon and held her flashlight in the other hand. "Step away from those items and keep your hands where I can see them," Sarah ordered. The man took 3 steps backward, moving away from the device and tool he had placed on the ground. Sarah could see that he was being very careful to follow her instructions exactly. This was also unusual behavior for a criminal, but Sarah had learned not to trust anyone completely until she knew more about the situation. "Officer, I really need to explain what I was doing here," the man said. "I work for the police department too. I'm Detective Michael Chen from the Financial Crimes Unit." Sarah had heard this type of story before. Criminals often claimed to be police officers, security guards, or other types of officials when they were caught committing crimes. They thought this might help them avoid being arrested. Sarah had been trained never to believe these claims until she could verify them properly. "Sure you are," Sarah said. "Stay right where you are and do not move." Sarah used her flashlight to examine the items the man had placed on the ground. The electronic device looked sophisticated and expensive. It had a small screen and several buttons, and there was indeed a thin cable attached to one end. The tool appeared to be a specialized type of screwdriver with a very thin blade. These items definitely looked like equipment that could be used to commit ATM crimes. Sarah had seen similar devices during her training, and they matched what the instructors had shown her. The electronic device could be used to reprogram ATM machines or to test skimming equipment that had been installed. Sarah looked back at the man who was still standing with his hands raised. He was watching her examine his tools, and she could see that he looked worried now. He had good reason to be worried, Sarah thought. If these were really tools for committing ATM crimes, he was looking at serious charges. The man tried to speak again. "Officer, if you check my back pocket, you will find my badge and identification. I am really a detective, and I was working on an official investigation." Sarah had heard this exact same story from other criminals before. "I will check your identification after backup arrives and you are secured," she told him. "Until then, just stay quiet and keep your hands visible." In the distance, Sarah could hear the sound of another police car approaching. The backup she had requested was almost there. Sarah felt relieved because having another officer present would make the situation much safer for everyone. The sound of the approaching backup patrol car grew louder, and Sarah could see the emergency lights flashing in the distance. She felt more confident now that help was almost there. Dealing with suspected criminals was always safer when you had another officer present to help watch for any sudden movements or unexpected problems. The man in the black hoodie was still standing with his hands raised, but Sarah noticed that he kept looking toward the approaching police car. His expression had changed from worried to something that looked almost like relief. This confused Sarah because most criminals became more nervous when they saw additional police officers arriving. "Officer, when your backup gets here, please ask them to contact Lieutenant Foster from the Financial Crimes Unit," the man said. "He can verify who I am and explain what I was doing here tonight." Sarah did not respond to this request. She had learned during her training that criminals often tried to create confusion by giving police officers complicated stories and asking them to make phone calls to verify information. These tactics were designed to waste time and create opportunities for the suspect to escape or hide evidence. The backup patrol car pulled up behind Sarah's vehicle, and Officer James Wilson got out. Sarah had worked with Wilson many times before, and she trusted him to help handle this situation properly. Wilson was an experienced officer who had been with the department for almost 10 years. "What do we have here, Martinez?" Wilson asked as he approached Sarah's position behind her car door. "Suspected ATM tampering," Sarah replied. "I caught him working on the machines with electronic equipment. He claims to be a detective, but I have not verified that yet." Wilson nodded and looked at the man who was still standing with his hands raised. "Sir, we are going to need you to turn around and place your hands behind your back so we can secure you while we figure out what is going on here." "Officers, please listen to me," the man said, his voice becoming more urgent. "I am Detective Michael Chen, Badge number 2847, assigned to the Financial Crimes Unit under Lieutenant Foster. I have been conducting surveillance on these ATM machines for 3 weeks as part of an ongoing investigation into a skimming operation. Sarah and Wilson looked at each other. The man's story was very detailed, which was unusual for a criminal making up a false identity. Most fake stories were much simpler and less specific, but Sarah had also learned that some criminals were very smart and could create believable lies when they were caught. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back," Wilson repeated firmly. "We will check your identification after you are secured." The man looked frustrated, but he slowly turned around and put his hands behind his back. Sarah approached him carefully while Wilson kept his hand near his weapon and watched for any signs of trouble. Sarah pulled out her handcuffs and placed them on the man's wrists. As she did this, she noticed that his hands were clean and soft, not rough like the hands of someone who worked with tools and machinery all the time. This was another detail that did not fit with her expectations of a typical ATM criminal. "I am placing you under arrest on suspicion of attempted theft and tampering with financial equipment," Sarah said as she finished securing the handcuffs. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The man listened to his Miranda rights without interrupting, which was also unusual. Most criminals either argued about being arrested or asked questions about what was going to happen to them. This man just stood quietly and waited for Sarah to finish reading his rights. After completing the Miranda warning, Sarah began to search the man's pockets for identification and any other items that might be evidence. In his front right pocket, she found a set of car keys. In his front left pocket, she found a cell phone and what appeared to be a small notebook. When Sarah reached his back pocket, she found a leather wallet. Inside the wallet, she discovered several credit cards, a driver's license, and what appeared to be a police badge and identification card. Sarah examined these items carefully with her flashlight. The driver's license showed the name Michael Chen and had a photo that matched the man she had just arrested. The address on the license was in a nice neighborhood about 15 minutes away from downtown. The police badge looked real and had the number 2847 engraved on it, exactly as the man had claimed. The identification card was more detailed. It showed Michael Chen's photo and identified him as a detective with the Metro Police Department, assigned to the Financial Crimes Unit. The card looked official and had security features that would be difficult to fake. Sarah showed these items to Wilson, who examined them carefully. "These look real," Wilson said quietly. "But we have seen fake police badges before. We should verify this through dispatch before we make any decisions," Sarah agreed. Even if the badge and identification looked real, it was possible that they were very good fakes. Some criminals spent a lot of money on fake identification because it could help them avoid serious charges if they were caught committing crimes. "Dispatch, this is Unit 47, Sarah said into her radio. "I need you to verify the identity of Detective Michael Chen, badge number 2847, assigned to Financial Crimes Unit under Lieutenant Foster." "Stand by." "Unit 47, the dispatcher replied. While they waited for verification, Sarah walked over to examine the electronic device and tool that the man had been using. Wilson stayed with the suspect, keeping a close watch on him. The electronic device was more sophisticated than Sarah had first realized. It had a digital display that showed numbers and letters, and there were several small ports where cables could be connected. The device looked expensive and professional, not like something a typical street criminal would own. The tool was also unusual. It was a specialized screwdriver with a very thin, precise blade. The handle was made of high-quality material and felt balanced in Sarah's hand. This was definitely not a cheap tool from a hardware store. Sarah took photos of both items with her phone to document the evidence. She also took pictures of the ATM machines to show exactly where the suspect had been working when she arrived. The radio crackled with the dispatcher's response. "Unit 47, I show Detective Michael Chen, badge 2847, as an active member of the Financial Crimes Unit. However, I cannot reach Lieutenant Foster at this time to verify current assignment status." "Do you want me to try to contact someone else from that unit?" Sarah looked at Wilson, who shrugged. "This is getting complicated," Wilson said. "Maybe we should take him to the station and sort it out there." The man who claimed to be Detective Chen spoke up. "Officers, I understand your caution, but you are about to compromise a major investigation that has been running for 3 weeks. The equipment you found belongs to the police department, and I was using it to remove skimming devices that criminals installed on these machines. Sarah stared at the man. If his story was true, then she had just arrested a fellow police officer who was doing his job. But if his story was false, then he was a very good liar who had prepared fake identification and a detailed cover story. What exactly were you doing to the ATM machines? Sarah asked. I was removing illegal skimming devices that the suspects in our investigation installed yesterday, Chen replied. My unit has been tracking a group of criminals who have been targeting ATMs all over the city. We finally identified which machines they were using, and I was sent to collect the evidence. This explanation made some sense to Sarah. It would explain why Chen had sophisticated electronic equipment and why he was being so careful about his work. It would also explain why he did not run when he saw her police car. Sarah looked at the man claiming to be Detective Chen and felt uncertain about what to do next. His explanation sounded reasonable, and his identification appeared to be real. But Sarah had been trained to be very careful about trusting people during criminal investigations, even when they claimed to be police officers. Wilson walked over to Sarah and spoke quietly so the suspect could not hear them. What do you think, Martinez? His ID looks real, and dispatch confirmed his name and badge number, but something still feels off about this whole situation. Sarah nodded. I know what you mean. If he really is a detective working on an investigation, why did not anyone tell patrol officers about this operation? We usually get some kind of notice when detective units are working in our area, especially late at night. That is exactly what I was thinking, Wilson agreed. And if he was really removing evidence from these machines, where is the equipment he collected? I do not see any evidence bags or containers where he would store the skimming devices he claims to have removed. Sarah had not thought about this detail, but Wilson was right. Detective work required careful documentation and proper handling of evidence. If Chen was really collecting evidence from ATM machines, he should have proper evidence bags and some kind of system for documenting what he found. Sarah walked back to where Chen was standing with his hands cuffed behind his back. Detective Chen, if that is really who you are, can you explain where the evidence you collected is located? I do not see any evidence bags or containers where you would store the skimming devices you claim to have removed. Chen looked frustrated. The devices I removed are in my car, he said. I have a proper evidence kit in my trunk, and everything is documented according to department procedures. My car is parked about 2 blocks away because I did not want the suspects to see an obvious police vehicle if they came back to check on their equipment. This explanation also sounded reasonable to Sarah. Undercover operations often required officers to use unmarked vehicles and stay hidden from the criminals they were investigating. But Sarah still felt unsure about whether to believe Chen's story. Where exactly is your car parked? Wilson asked. On 3rd Street behind the blue building with the insurance office, Chen replied. It is a dark gray Honda Civic with license plate number VFK 429. The evidence I collected is in a locked box in the trunk. Wilson wrote down this information in his notebook. We can check that out, he told Sarah. But I still think we should take him to the station and get this sorted out properly. Even if he really is a detective, there are procedures we need to follow. Sarah agreed with Wilson's suggestion. The situation was too complicated to handle properly at the scene, especially since they could not immediately verify all of Chen's claims about his investigation and evidence. Mr. Chen, or Detective Chen, whatever your real identity is, we are going to take you to the station so we can verify your story completely, Sarah said. If you really are a police officer, this will all get sorted out quickly. If you are not, then you are in serious trouble for impersonating a police officer and attempting to commit ATM fraud. Chen sighed deeply. Officer Martinez, I understand that you are doing your job and I respect that. But you need to understand that every minute we spend on this is giving the real criminals more time to discover that their equipment has been removed. Once they figure out that we are onto them, they will disappear and we will lose months of investigation work. Sarah felt a little guilty about this possibility, but she knew she had to follow proper procedures. If your story is true, then your supervisors will understand that we had to verify your identity, she said. Police officers should always be able to prove who they are when they are questioned by other officers. Wilson walked over to his patrol car to call for a transport vehicle. It was standard procedure to have suspects transported to the station in a special vehicle rather than in the back of a regular patrol car. While Wilson was making this call, Sarah continued to question Chen. "Can you tell me more details about this investigation you claim to be working on?" Sarah asked. "What is the name of the criminal group you are tracking and how long have they been operating?" Chen thought for a moment before answering. "The group does not have an official name, but we have been calling them the Metro Skimmers because they have been targeting ATM machines all over the metropolitan area. We first became aware of them about 6 months ago, when banks started reporting unusual patterns of card fraud. The investigation really got serious about 3 weeks ago when we finally identified some of the specific machines they were targeting." "How many people are in this criminal group?" Sarah asked. "We believe there are at least 4 people directly involved in installing and maintaining the skimming equipment," Chen replied. "But there might be more people involved in the financial side of the operation, like creating fake cards and withdrawing money from accounts." Sarah was impressed by the detailed answers Chen was giving. Most criminals who made up stories about being police officers could not provide this level of specific information about investigations and procedures, but she still needed to verify everything before she could be sure about his identity. Wilson returned from his car and told Sarah that a transport vehicle would arrive in about 10 minutes. "I also asked dispatch to try to contact Lieutenant Foster again," Wilson said. "Maybe he will answer his phone this time." While they waited for the transport vehicle, Sarah decided to examine the ATM machines more carefully. If Chen was telling the truth about removing skimming devices, there might be evidence of where these devices had been attached to the machines. Sarah used her flashlight to look closely at the card reader slots on both machines where Chen had been working. On the first machine, she could see small scratches around the edges of the card slot, as if something had been attached there and then removed. There were also tiny marks that might have been left by the screwdriver Chen had been carrying. The second machine showed similar signs. The card reader area had small scratches and marks that suggested something had been attached and then carefully removed. Sarah also noticed that the area around the card slot was very clean, as if someone had wiped it down after working on it. These details seemed to support Chen's story about removing equipment rather than installing it. If Chen had been installing skimming devices, the machines would probably show different types of marks, and he would not have cleaned the areas afterward. Sarah took more photos of these details with her phone. If Chen's story turned out to be true, these photos would help document that proper evidence collection procedures had been followed. If Chen's story was false, the photos would be evidence of the damage he had caused to the ATM machines. The transport vehicle arrived, and 2 officers got out to take custody of Chen. Sarah explained the situation to the transport officers and gave them copies of Chen's identification documents. She also gave them the evidence bags containing the electronic device and screwdriver that Chen had been using. "We will take him to booking and start the verification process," one of the transport officers told Sarah. "If he really is a detective, someone from his unit should be able to come down and clear this up pretty quickly." As the transport vehicle drove away with Chen in the back seat, Sarah felt mixed emotions about what had just happened. If Chen was really a criminal, then she had done a good job catching him in the act of committing a serious crime. But if Chen was really a detective, then she had just arrested a fellow police officer and possibly compromised an important investigation. Wilson must have noticed Sarah's expression because he walked over and put a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You did the right thing, Martinez," he said. "When you find someone working on ATM machines in the middle of the night with electronic equipment, you have to treat it as a crime until proven otherwise. Even if this guy really is a detective, he should have made sure patrol officers knew about his operation." Sarah and Wilson followed the transport vehicle back to the police station. During the drive, Sarah could not stop thinking about everything that had happened at the ATM machines. The more she thought about it, the more she began to worry that she might have made a serious mistake. When they arrived at the station, Sarah went directly to the booking area to check on what was happening with Chen. She found Sergeant Rodriguez, the night shift supervisor, talking to the transport officers about the arrest. "Martinez, I hear you brought in someone who claims to be one of our own detectives," Sergeant Rodriguez said. "This is a pretty unusual situation. We need to get this sorted out as quickly as possible." "Yes, sir," Sarah replied. "I found him working on ATM machines with electronic equipment in the middle of the night. He had what appeared to be legitimate police identification, but I could not verify his story at the scene. Sergeant Rodriguez nodded. You did the right thing by bringing him in. Even if he really is a detective, we need to follow proper procedures. I have been trying to reach Lieutenant Foster from Financial Crimes, but he is not answering his phone. Let me try calling the Financial Crimes unit directly. Sarah waited nervously while Sergeant Rodriguez made the phone call. She could hear him talking to someone on the other end, but she could not make out what was being said. After a few minutes, Rodriguez hung up the phone and turned back to Sarah. Well, this is interesting, Rodriguez said. I just spoke to Detective Williams from Financial Crimes. He confirms that there is a Detective Michael Chen working in their unit, and he says Chen is currently assigned to a special investigation involving ATM skimming operations. Sarah felt her stomach drop. So he really is a police officer? It looks that way, Rodriguez replied. Detective Williams is coming down here right now to verify Chen's identity and explain what he was doing tonight. Williams says this investigation has been going on for several weeks and involves multiple agencies. Sarah sat down in a nearby chair, feeling overwhelmed by this news. She had arrested a fellow police officer who was working on an important investigation. This was exactly the kind of situation that could end a police officer's career if it was handled badly. Sergeant, what happens now? Sarah asked. Am I going to be in trouble for arresting another officer? Rodriguez sat down next to Sarah. Martinez, listen to me. You responded to a call about suspicious activity. You found someone working on ATM machines with electronic equipment in the middle of the night, and you followed proper procedures to investigate. Even if this person turned out to be a police officer, you had no way of knowing that for certain at the scene. But what if I compromised his investigation? Sarah asked. He said that arresting him could ruin weeks of work and let the criminals escape. That is not your responsibility, Rodriguez said firmly. If Detective Chen was working on an undercover operation in your patrol area, his supervisors should have notified patrol officers about it. There are procedures for coordinating between different units, and it sounds like those procedures were not followed properly. About 20 minutes later, Detective Williams arrived at the station. He was a tall man in his 40s with graying hair and a serious expression. Sarah could tell immediately that he was not happy about the situation. Williams went directly to the booking area where Chen was being held. Sarah watched through the window as Williams spoke to Chen and examined his identification. After a few minutes, Williams came back out and approached Sarah and Sergeant Rodriguez. Detective Chen is definitely one of our officers, Williams confirmed. He has been working on Operation Clean Sweep, which is a joint investigation targeting a major ATM skimming ring that has been operating throughout the city. Sarah felt both relieved and worried at the same time. She was relieved that she had not arrested an innocent person or a criminal with fake identification, but she was worried about the consequences of interrupting an important police investigation. Detective Williams, I am very sorry about this misunderstanding, Sarah said. I had no idea that Detective Chen was working on an official investigation. When I saw him working on the ATM machines with electronic equipment, it looked exactly like criminal activity. Williams looked at Sarah for a moment before responding. Officer Martinez, you actually did exactly what you should have done in this situation. When you see someone tampering with ATM machines late at night, you investigate. The problem is not with your response. The problem is that my unit failed to coordinate properly with patrol officers. This response surprised Sarah. She had expected Williams to be angry about the arrest and the disruption to their investigation. Instead, he seemed to understand that she had been doing her job properly. What Detective Chen was doing tonight was removing skimming devices that the suspects in our investigation had installed on those ATM machines. Yesterday, Williams explained, we have been tracking this criminal group for 3 weeks, and we finally identified which machines they were targeting. Chen was collecting evidence that we need to build our case against them. Sergeant Rodriguez asked the obvious question. Why was patrol not notified about this operation? We usually coordinate when detective units are working in patrol areas, especially during night shifts. Williams looked embarrassed. That was an oversight on our part. Lieutenant Foster was supposed to send notification to patrol supervisors, but apparently that message never went out. We have been so focused on the investigation that we forgot about proper coordination procedures. Sarah began to understand the full picture of what had happened. Detective Chen really was a police officer working on a legitimate investigation, but his unit had failed to notify patrol officers about their operation, which led to the confusion and arrest. Is Detective Chen's investigation going to be compromised because of this? Sarah asked. Williams thought about this question carefully before answering. It might be, he said honestly. The suspects in our case are very careful about checking their equipment regularly. If they discover that their skimming devices have been removed, they will know that law enforcement is on to them. But that might have happened anyway, even without tonight's incident. Williams paused and then continued. Actually, there might be a way to turn this situation to our advantage. The suspects do not know that Detective Chen is a police officer. If they hear about his arrest through police scanner traffic or other sources, they might think he was just a random criminal who happened to steal their equipment. This possibility had not occurred to Sarah. You mean they might think Detective Chen was trying to steal their skimming devices for his own criminal purposes? Exactly, Williams replied. ATM skimming equipment is valuable, and there are criminals who steal from other criminals. If the suspects think that is what happened, they might not realize that police are investigating them. They might even continue with their operation, which would give us more opportunities to catch them. Sergeant Rodriguez nodded thoughtfully. So this arrest might actually help your investigation instead of hurting it? It is possible, Williams said. We will have to see how the suspects react when they discover their equipment is missing. But Officer Martinez's actions tonight might have given us a cover story that helps protect our investigation. Sarah felt much better about the situation now. Not only had she followed proper procedures, but her arrest of Detective Chen might actually help the investigation instead of compromising it. Sometimes mistakes could turn into opportunities if they were handled correctly. Detective Williams asked Sarah and Sergeant Rodriguez to join him in a private conference room, where they could discuss the situation without other people overhearing their conversation. The investigation that Detective Chen was working on involved sensitive information that needed to be kept confidential. Once they were seated in the conference room, Williams began to explain the full details of Operation Clean Sweep. Sarah listened carefully, realizing that she had become involved in something much more complicated than a simple arrest for ATM tampering. The criminal group we are investigating has been operating for at least 6 months, Williams began. They have stolen over $200,000 from bank accounts by using skimming devices on ATM machines throughout the metropolitan area. This is not just a local problem. We believe the same group has been operating in other cities as well. Sarah was impressed by the scope of the investigation. She had thought she was dealing with a simple case of someone trying to steal from 1 or 2 ATM machines. Now she learned that this was part of a major criminal operation that crossed city and state lines. How does the skimming operation work exactly? Sergeant Rodriguez asked. Williams pulled out a folder with photographs and documents. The criminals install fake card readers over the real card readers on ATM machines. When people use their bank cards, the fake readers copy all the information from the magnetic strips. The criminals also install tiny cameras to record people typing in their PIN numbers. Williams showed them photographs of skimming devices that had been found on other ATM machines. The devices were remarkably sophisticated and looked almost exactly like the real parts of the ATM machines. Sarah could see why it would be difficult for ordinary people to notice that anything was wrong. After they collect the card information and PIN numbers, the criminals make fake cards and use them to withdraw money from people's accounts, Williams continued. They usually do this late at night or early in the morning when there are fewer witnesses around. Sarah began to understand why Detective Chen's work was so important. So when Detective Chen was removing the skimming devices tonight, he was collecting evidence that could be used to catch these criminals. Exactly, Williams replied. We have been tracking this group for weeks, and we finally identified which ATM machines they were targeting. Detective Chen was collecting the skimming devices so we could analyze them for fingerprints, DNA evidence, and electronic information that might lead us to the criminals. Williams opened his folder and showed them more documents. We have surveillance photos of some of the suspects, and we know what cars they drive. We were planning to arrest them within the next few days, once we had collected enough evidence to ensure convictions. Sergeant Rodriguez looked at the surveillance photos. These look like professional criminals, not amateurs. They probably have experience with law enforcement procedures and know how to avoid getting caught. That is exactly right, Williams agreed. This group is very careful about their operations. They use stolen cars, they wear disguises, and they always work in teams so they can watch for police while they install their equipment. That is why Detective Chen's undercover work was so important. Sarah studied the surveillance photos and felt a new appreciation for how complex police detective work could be. The photos showed several different people at various ATM locations, but their faces were often hidden by hats, sunglasses, or hoodies. It would be very difficult to identify these people without additional evidence. Detective Williams, what happens to the investigation now that Detective Chen has been arrested? Sarah asked. Will you still be able to catch these criminals? Williams considered this question carefully. It depends on how the criminals react when they discover that their equipment is missing from those ATM machines. If they think Detective Chen was just another criminal who stole their devices, they might continue with their operation and give us more chances to catch them. But if they suspect that law enforcement is involved, they will probably disappear and start their operation somewhere else, Sergeant Rodriguez added. That is the risk we face, Williams agreed. But there might be ways to use tonight's events to our advantage. We could release information about Detective Chen's arrest that makes it look like he was caught committing a regular crime. If the real criminals hear this information, they might not suspect that he was actually a police officer. This strategy sounded clever to Sarah, but she was worried about the consequences for Detective Chen. What would happen to Detective Chen if you release false information about him being a criminal? Would that hurt his reputation or his career? Williams smiled at Sarah's concern for her fellow officer. Detective Chen understands the risks of undercover work. If we need to protect his cover story by making it look like he was really committing a crime, he will agree to that. His reputation within the police department will not be affected, because we all know the truth about what he was really doing. Williams pulled out his cell phone and made a call to someone at the Financial Crimes Unit. Sarah could hear him discussing the situation and asking for instructions about how to proceed with the investigation. After finishing his phone call, Williams turned back to Sarah and Sergeant Rodriguez. I just spoke with Lieutenant Foster, Detective Chen's supervisor. He wants to meet with all of us to discuss how to handle this situation. He is coming to the station right now. While they waited for Lieutenant Foster to arrive, Williams explained more details about the investigation. Sarah learned that the Financial Crimes Unit had been working with the FBI and police departments in other cities to track this criminal group. The case involved multiple agencies and had the potential to shut down a major interstate crime operation. Officer Martinez, I want you to know that your actions tonight, even though they resulted in Detective Chen's arrest, have actually provided valuable information for our investigation, Williams said. The way you handled the situation, the evidence you collected, and the photos you took of the ATM machines will all be useful for our case. Sarah felt proud that her police work had contributed to an important investigation, even though she had not intended to become involved in detective work. Will I need to testify in court about what I saw tonight? Probably, Williams replied. Your testimony about finding Detective Chen at the ATM machines and the evidence you collected will help establish the timeline of events and prove that the criminals had actually installed skimming devices on those machines. Lieutenant Foster arrived at the station about 30 minutes later. He was a serious-looking man in his 50s who clearly had many years of experience with complex criminal investigations. Foster reviewed all the details of what had happened and examined the evidence that Sarah had collected. Officer Martinez, Detective Williams has told me about your professional handling of this situation, Lieutenant Foster said. Even though this created some complications for our investigation, you followed proper procedures and gathered excellent evidence. I want to commend you for your thorough police work. Sarah felt relieved to hear this praise from such an experienced supervisor. She had been worried that arresting Detective Chen would be seen as a serious mistake that could hurt her career. What happens next with the investigation? Sergeant Rodriguez asked. Lieutenant Foster looked at his notes before answering. We are going to continue with our plan to arrest the criminals, but we will adjust our strategy based on tonight's events. Officer Martinez's arrest of Detective Chen might actually help us catch these criminals if we handle it correctly. Lieutenant Foster asked everyone to move to a larger conference room where Detective Chen could join the discussion. Sarah felt nervous about facing the detective she had arrested, especially now that she knew he had been working on an important investigation. She was not sure what to expect from this meeting. When Detective Chen entered the conference room, Sarah was surprised by his appearance. He looked tired but not angry. In fact, he seemed almost relieved to finally be able to talk openly about what had been happening. Sarah had expected him to be upset about being arrested and having his investigation disrupted. "Detective Chen, are you okay?" Lieutenant Foster asked. "I know this has been a difficult night for you." Chen sat down at the conference table and looked around at everyone present. "I'm fine, Lieutenant. Actually, I want to thank Officer Martinez for doing her job properly. When I saw her patrol car approaching tonight, I realized how suspicious my activities must have looked to someone who did not know about our investigation." Sarah was shocked by this response. "Detective Chen, I am so sorry about arresting you. I had no idea you were working on an official police investigation. I thought you were committing a crime." Chen smiled at Sarah. "Officer Martinez, you saw someone working on ATM machines in the middle of the night with electronic equipment. Any good police officer would have investigated that situation exactly the way you did. The fact that I happen to be a detective does not change the fact that my behavior looked very suspicious." Lieutenant Foster nodded in agreement. Detective Chen is right. Officer Martinez responded appropriately to what appeared to be criminal activity. The problem is not with her actions. The problem is with our failure to coordinate properly with patrol units. Sergeant Rodriguez joined the conversation. "Lieutenant Foster, what procedures should have been followed to prevent this kind of misunderstanding?" Foster looked embarrassed as he answered this question. "We should have sent notification to all patrol supervisors before Detective Chen began his evidence collection work. We should have provided a description of Detective Chen, his vehicle, and the general area where he would be working. We should have also given patrol officers a contact number they could call to verify his identity if questions arose." Sarah realized that multiple mistakes had led to tonight's confusion. Detective Chen's unit had failed to coordinate with patrol officers, but she had also failed to consider some possibilities that might have prevented the arrest. "Lieutenant Foster, is there anything I should have done differently tonight?" Sarah asked. Looking back on the situation, were there any clues that Detective Chen was really a police officer? Foster thought about this question carefully. "Officer Martinez, when you found Detective Chen with what appeared to be legitimate police identification, you could have called for a supervisor to respond to the scene before making an arrest. Patrol supervisors sometimes have information about detective operations that regular patrol officers might not know about." Sarah made a mental note of this suggestion for future situations. "I will remember that for next time. I was focused on following standard procedures for suspicious activity, but I should have considered calling for a supervisor when the identification appeared to be real." Detective Williams added his perspective. "Officer Martinez, you also could have asked Detective Chen for more specific details about his investigation, such as the name of his supervisor and the case number he was working on. Real police officers can usually provide this information quickly, while criminals making up stories often struggle with specific details." These suggestions made sense to Sarah, but she also knew that police officers had to make quick decisions in potentially dangerous situations. It was easy to think of better approaches when you had time to analyze everything calmly in a conference room. Detective Chen spoke up again. "I want everyone to understand that Officer Martinez's actions tonight might actually help our investigation succeed. The criminals we are tracking do not know that I am a police officer. If they hear about my arrest through police scanner traffic or other sources, they might think I was just a thief who stole their skimming equipment." Lieutenant Foster agreed with this assessment. "We have decided to use tonight's events as part of our investigation strategy. We will release limited information about Detective Chen's arrest that makes it appear he was caught committing ATM fraud. This cover story might prevent the criminals from suspecting that law enforcement is investigating them." Sarah began to understand how detective work involved much more complicated thinking than regular patrol work. Detectives had to consider not just what had happened, but also how their actions might affect ongoing investigations and future arrests. "How will you make sure the criminals believe the cover story?" Sergeant Rodriguez asked. Detective Williams answered this question. "We will process Detective Chen through the normal booking procedures, just as if he were really a criminal. We will also make sure that information about his arrest appears in the daily police reports that are sometimes accessed by defense attorneys and other people who might have connections to criminal organizations." This plan seemed clever to Sarah, but she was concerned about the potential consequences for Detective Chen. "Detective Chen, are you comfortable with having false criminal charges on your record, even temporarily?" Chen nodded. This is part of undercover work, Officer Martinez. Sometimes you have to sacrifice your personal reputation to protect an investigation. The charges will be dropped once we arrest the real criminals, and my personnel file will reflect the truth about what happened tonight. Lieutenant Foster looked at his watch and announced that they needed to make some quick decisions about how to proceed. The criminals we are investigating usually check their skimming equipment early in the morning. Around 5 a.m., it is now 4:15 a.m., so we do not have much time to implement our plan. Detective Williams pulled out his cell phone and began making calls to other members of the investigation team. Sarah could hear him explaining the situation and giving instructions about how to prepare for the criminals' possible arrival at the ATM machines. Officer Martinez, we would like you to continue patrol in the area around those ATM machines, Lieutenant Foster said. If the criminals show up to check their equipment, you will be in position to observe them and call for backup. This could be our chance to catch them in the act. Sarah felt excited about the possibility of participating in the arrest of these criminals. After accidentally disrupting the investigation by arresting Detective Chen, she wanted to help make sure the case was successful. What should I do if I see the suspects at the ATM machines? Sarah asked. Observe and report only, Foster replied firmly. Do not attempt to approach them or make arrests by yourself. These criminals are experienced and potentially dangerous. We will have detective units positioned nearby to handle any arrests. As the meeting ended, Sarah realized that her routine patrol shift had turned into something much more significant. She had learned about the complexity of detective work, the importance of coordination between different police units, and the challenges of undercover investigations. Most importantly, she had discovered that sometimes mistakes could lead to unexpected opportunities if they were handled correctly. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the police station feeling both tired and curious about what had happened after she left the night before. She had spent the rest of her shift patrolling near the ATM machines, but the criminals never showed up to check their equipment. Now she wanted to learn whether the investigation had been successful. Sarah found Detective Chen in the break room, drinking coffee and reading reports. He looked much more relaxed than he had during the previous night's confusion. When he saw Sarah, he smiled and invited her to sit down at his table. Good morning, Officer Martinez, Chen said. I wanted to thank you again for how professionally you handled everything last night. I know it was a difficult situation for both of us. Sarah sat down across from Chen, still feeling somewhat embarrassed about the arrest. Detective Chen, I keep thinking about whether I could have done something differently. I feel bad that I disrupted your investigation and caused so much trouble. Chen shook his head. Officer Martinez, you did not cause any trouble. In fact, your actions last night led to a breakthrough in our case. After you arrested me, the criminals did exactly what we hoped they would do. Sarah looked surprised. What do you mean? I thought the criminals never showed up at the ATM machines. They did not show up at those specific machines, Chen explained. But they did something even better from our perspective. When they heard about my arrest through their police scanner, they panicked and decided to collect all their skimming equipment from ATM machines throughout the city. Chen pulled out a folder with photographs and showed them to Sarah. We had surveillance teams watching 12 different ATM locations where we suspected the criminals had installed equipment. Early this morning, around 6 a.m., members of the criminal group visited 8 of those locations to remove their skimming devices. Sarah studied the surveillance photographs. They showed clear images of 3 different people working on ATM machines at various locations around the city. Unlike the previous surveillance photos she had seen, these new pictures showed the suspects' faces clearly. Were you able to arrest them? Sarah asked. Chen smiled. We arrested 2 of them while they were removing equipment from machines on Oak Street. The 3rd suspect got away, but we have excellent photographs of him and we know what car he was driving. We expect to arrest him within the next day or 2. Sarah felt amazed that her mistake had led to such positive results. So my arresting you actually helped catch the criminals? Absolutely, Chen replied. When the criminals heard that someone had been arrested at the ATM machines where they had installed equipment, they assumed their operation had been discovered. They decided to abandon those locations and collect all their equipment before police could find it. Chen explained that this reaction was exactly what the investigation team had hoped for. By rushing to collect their equipment, the criminals exposed themselves to surveillance and gave us the evidence we needed to make arrests. If you had not arrested me, they might have continued their operation for weeks or months without being caught. Lieutenant Foster approached their table and joined the conversation. "Officer Martinez, I wanted to give you an update on the case. Thanks to the events you set in motion last night, we were able to recover skimming equipment from 8 ATM machines and arrest 2 major suspects in this crime ring." Sarah felt proud of her contribution to the investigation, even though it had happened by accident. "Lieutenant Foster, what happens next with the case?" "We are analyzing the equipment we recovered for fingerprints and DNA evidence," Foster replied. "We also found financial records in the suspect's possession that show they stole over $300,000 from bank accounts during the past 6 months. This case will probably result in federal charges because the crimes crossed state lines." Foster sat down at the table and continued explaining the investigation. "Officer Martinez, your arrest report and the evidence you collected last night will be important parts of the prosecution case. The photos you took of the ATM machines and the detailed notes you made about Detective Chen's activities will help establish the timeline of the criminal's operation." Sarah realized that her routine patrol work had contributed to a major criminal investigation that involved multiple agencies and hundreds of thousands of dollars in stolen money. This was much more significant than anything she had been involved with during her 5 years as a patrol officer. "Will Detective Chen's arrest record cause any problems for him?" Sarah asked. Detective Chen answered this question himself. "The charges against me were dropped this morning, and my personnel file shows that the arrest was part of an undercover operation. My reputation and career are not affected by what happened." Lieutenant Foster added more details. "We decided not to release information about Detective Chen's real identity to the news media. As far as the public knows, we arrested someone for ATM tampering, and then released him when we realized he was not connected to the major crime ring we were investigating. This approach protected both Detective Chen's undercover work and the ongoing investigation of any remaining suspects who might still be at large." 2 days later, Sarah received a call from Detective Williams asking her to meet him at the Financial Crimes Unit office. When she arrived, she found that they had prepared a special presentation about Operation Clean Sweep and her role in its success. "Officer Martinez, your professional response to suspicious activity resulted in the most successful operation our unit has conducted this year," Williams said. "We wanted to recognize your contribution and invite you to participate in the final phase of our investigation." Williams explained that they had arrested the 3rd suspect and were now preparing for the trial of all 3 criminals. "We would like you to assist with the arrests of several other people who helped the main suspects launder the money they stole. This would give you experience with financial crimes investigation and help our unit with the additional manpower we need." Sarah felt honored by this invitation. Working with the Financial Crimes Unit would be an excellent opportunity to learn about different types of police work and advance her career. The experience taught Sarah several important lessons about police work. She learned that coordination between different units was essential for successful investigations. She learned that mistakes could sometimes lead to unexpected opportunities if they were handled professionally. Most importantly, she learned that good police work involved being observant, following procedures, and always being willing to learn from new situations. 3 months later, Sarah received a commendation from the police chief for her role in Operation Clean Sweep. The commendation recognized her professional response to suspicious activity and valuable contribution to a major criminal investigation. Detective Chen was also recognized for his undercover work, and Lieutenant Foster implemented new procedures to ensure better coordination between detective units and patrol officers. The case became a model for how different parts of the police department could work together effectively. Sarah kept in touch with Detective Chen and occasionally worked with the Financial Crimes Unit on cases that required additional patrol support. The experience had opened new possibilities for her career and given her a deeper appreciation for the complexity and importance of police detective work. Looking back on that night at the ATM machines, Sarah realized that doing the right thing and following proper procedures was always the best approach. Even when the situation was confusing or uncertain, sometimes the most routine calls could lead to the most significant results.